If you look at the British aircraft industry as a whole during the war years, there were about 5 top manufacturers. De Havilland's certainly one of them. I had very high regard for them, and the test team too. As you look through the air shows around the world, there's a certain dearth of mosquitoes. Here's one of our top airplanes, and not many around the world. Any attempt to restore, particularly to flying status, a Mosquito would be a really gift to our heritage. We need something like this to remind the British public how it was and what were the tools that really saved the day for us. And when you talk about that, the Mosquito's in there, believe you me. First time I saw it, I realised it had all the looks of a potential winner. For its time, it was incredibly beautifully streamlined. It just oozed power, really. Naturally, when you have looks like a good one, you expect it'll fly similarly, but it exceeded all expectations. And was one of Britain's 3 great aircraft in World War II. We had, to my mind, 3 really greats: the Spitfire, inevitably, the Mosquito and the Lancaster. And they all had a huge part to play. Maybe the Mosquito more than most, because it was very versatile. Fighter, night fighter, bomber, did the lot. And when it was flown as a Pathfinder aircraft, it really showed its worth. I was a test pilot at Boscombe Down. This was in December 1943. And in early January, I had a call from the Admiralty saying, did I think I could land a Mosquito on an aircraft carrier? Now, why did they ask me? Because I'd done a huge number of deck landing trials on all sorts of aircraft. And I'd never actually at that time flown a Mosquito. And in fact, I'd rarely seen one except in the air. But with all the brash bravado of youth, I said, oh yes, we'll have a go at that. And so before I could move any further, I was whistled off to Farnborough in mid-January 1944. And the Mosquito arrived shortly after me, and we set about it. We were told to be ready to take it on by the landing, that's to say, by March or mid-March 1944. So we had quite a tight time to get sorted out. I had a boffin assigned to me to help with any problems that were involved. He was a graduate of Glasgow University, so being 2 Scots, we hit it off quite well. And we realised we had quite a lot of problems. The problems were these. Firstly, there was speed, landing speed. Now, the pilot's notes quote the approach speed for the Mosquito. This was a Mosquito 6, but the same for all Mosquitoes, really, as 125 miles an hour. I was told that because of the limitations of the performance of the arrestor gear, the maximum speed I must arrive at into the arrestor gear was 83 miles an hour. So I had to get rid of 40-odd miles an hour. And there was only one way of doing that, of course, and they realised they would have to provide more powerful engines. That's the first thing. The second thing was we had 4-bladed propellers instead of 3. And the unfortunate thing was, because they were experimental propellers, they couldn't be feathered. So we did not want to have an engine failure on the approach under any circumstances. We tried that up in the air with my boffin friend, and we found that if we had an engine failure on the approach, the Mosquito would invert itself within 2 seconds. And so that would have been that. In other words, any engine failure on the approach would have been fatal. So it was quite a high-risk operation, really. But it had to be done because of Highball. But there's no way of guarding against it, except keeping your fingers crossed. So, the stalling speed of the Mosquito in the landing condition is 110 miles an hour. So we had to bring it down, we were told, to 83. The only way to do that was to hold a huge amount of power on the engines and the propellers churning out huge slipstream, and in other words, hang on the props and keep coming in at about 90 miles an hour, hanging on the props. And when you were near the deck, just cut both engines at about no more than 3 feet above the deck, and you just fell onto it. That worked out very well. In fact, we went a bit better than we had anticipated. In the first touchdown, my entry speed into number 2 arrestor wire was 78 miles an hour. So we showed it could be done. And I think after that, everybody got a lot more confident because we had obviously a bit in hand there. And the next problem was weight. The heaviest airplane that had been landed on a British carrier was the Grumman Avenger at 10,000 pounds. We were going to start the landings on the Mosquito at 16,000, but go up to 20,000 and go up to a takeoff of 21 with full bomb load. So there was quite a bit there that might go wrong. We just didn't know. Thirdly, there was the question of strength of the aircraft. This is a wooden airplane. Arrested landings aren't very kind to aircraft structures, and many predicted that either the hook would be torn out or the back end would be torn off. But they only did one bit of strengthening. They put 2 extra longeons on in the fuselage to give a bit of strength, and the arrestor hook was from a Barracuda type aircraft. These were the only structural alterations that were made. In fact, we had a failure of the arrestor hook, but not by pulling out the claw that actually contacts the wire. The bolts holding it snapped, so the claw could move this way and slipped out of the arrestor wire, and left us with a quick decision to make. What I had to decide was whether the arrestor wire had broken, in which case I should just stay with it, but because it might pick up the next wire if the arrestor wire had broken. Or if the hook had broken, I better get out of it fast. And this is where your experience comes in. I had done a huge amount of deck landing. right away I realised that the hook had broken. Wasn't the arrestor wire that had gone. So without any to do at all, I opened up to full power. And we went over the left side with the amount of torque we got. But we'd picked up enough speed to stay airborne. There are people on board who said our wheels touched the water before we picked up, but I have my doubts about that. But it's always good stories come out of these things. That was the only major problem that I had at all with it. For takeoff, of course, we had this powerful swing to port, which fortunately is away from the island. One had to be a bit careful, and in an attempt to help the situation, de Havilland put a tail wheel lock on it. They didn't put a Marstrand tire on, but they put a tail wheel lock on. But frankly, that made little or no difference. The whole objective of these trials was not really that the Navy wanted a Mosquito on deck. They had decided that that was probably going a step too far. But I found out later, and it was never mentioned in the early part what the object of all this was. But eventually I ran into Barnes Wallis and realised something was on there because he was, I'd been sent up to an airfield called Beccles in Norfolk, and there was a squadron there, and I was to demonstrate deck landing to them on the airfield. And I thought, now why am I demonstrating this to a bunch of RAF boys? But then in the hangar I came across Barnes Wallis moving around, and I asked him what he was up to, and he was very reticent to talk about it at all. But eventually, through squeezing both the RAF and Barnes Wallis, I reckon I found that it was all a preparation for Operation Highball. This was going to be sending 2 carriers to Japan, loaded with mosquitoes, carrying the spinning bomb. Not the dam busters type bomb, which looked like an oil can, an oil drum, but a totally spherical bomb, which would fit into the Mosquito bomb bay. Still protruding, but it would go in there. The idea was to make a dam busters type attack on capital ships in Japanese harbours, and then return to the carrier and attempt to land on, or bail out or whatever. They hoped to recover the Mossies because there were 24 going to take part in this operation, 2 aircraft carriers carrying between them 24 Mossies. The RAF were given 5 Barracudas to familiarise themselves with deck landing. Now the Barracuda is probably the easiest deck landing aircraft you can ever find, but they managed to prang all 5 of them. So I really wasn't too hopeful how the outcome was going to be about when they came back to the ships, if they came back. But that is the story behind it. But it all was cancelled because they had worked up and were ready to go, but just before they were sent off, the second atom bomb was dropped, and the whole thing was cancelled.